I've been waiting all pandemic to do this, people. Finally, on stage again. But first of all, Perry Worldhouse provides a number of course development grants and opportunities to host visiting fellows, things like that, particularly for faculty whose work has a strong policy dimension, and invite you to check out their website for more information about that. Penn Abroad, our sister division within Penn Global, has several different programs, including the Penn Global Seminars, which is an opportunity for undergraduate students to take trips abroad, and a new program called the Penn Global Research Institutes, which is in a pilot phase, but eventually envisions providing faculty with an opportunity to take undergraduate students primarily for summer research experiences abroad. So a couple of other opportunities there. There's also a division called International Student and Scholar Services that provides support to faculty, departments, and programs who are hosting visiting scholars from abroad, and provides a lot of support for visa and immigration issues, as well as integration and support issues when those visiting students and or international students and visiting scholars arrive at Penn. Finally, we have a division called Global Support Services, which provides a lot of logistical, legal, compliance, taxation support for faculty working abroad. So a great resource for essentially any type of structured or formal work that you're doing outside the United States. Again, everything from travel to taxation, overseas purchasing, all of memoranda of understanding, all of those types of issues. Global Support Services is a great resource. And you can kind of keep those in mind, search for them. Also, feel free to reach out to Chris and I, and we can connect you with those resources if you're interested. That being said, on to the main event and our sort of reason for being here today. To talk specifically about our Penn Global Research and Engagement Fund awards. And really, and we have a couple of different programs, which I'll get to in a second, but all of them have three common objectives that we try to work towards. The first is to position Penn to contribute important knowledge and understanding of issues, trends, phenomena, or challenges that are global in scope and that pertain to our focus countries and regions. And again, I'll get to those in a second. The second objective is to promote collaboration and the integration of knowledge across Penn schools and disciplines. So as much as we're interested in positioning Penn as an institution, we're also interested in fostering greater collaboration within the institution as well. And then finally, we have as a core objective the intention to strengthen and build equitable partnerships between Penn and overseas research institutions and other entities that are collaborators. And we place particular emphasis on that idea of equitable partnerships. It's quite kind of common and long-standing practice to sort of think of research partnerships between American higher education institutes and foreign counterparts as a little bit of a one-way street where knowledge and resources kind of flow from one to the other. We really see that as a two-way street, and we really value programs, initiatives, and projects that contribute to that two-way and two-directional flow and exchange. Just want to say a quick word about our different programs. We do have 4 separate research and engagement funds, and one of them is global in scope, as its name implies, the Global Engagement Fund. It's also our longest standing program, but we have 3 others that focus on specific countries and regions, namely China, India, and a new Africa Regional Fund, which we just established a couple of months ago, really. And I'll say another quick word about that in a second. The kind of important thing to know here, though, is that, and we'll talk again a little bit more about this in a second, we have a common application process across these different funds, but depending on which projects or which countries or regions your project engages, your funding will be structured so as to draw on across these different funds. So it's helpful to kind of be aware of them. Some of them do have slightly different sort of objectives and provisions. So for example, the China Fund requires sort of some form of engagement with Penn's overseas center in Beijing, the Penn Wharton China Center. But the application process is common, and we'll again say a little bit more about that in a second. Just to say another quick word about our Africa fund, because it is our newest, and in some ways operates a little bit differently from the other funds in that it's regional as opposed to either global or focused on one particular country. But it's an initiative that we're really excited about because it is part of a university-wide initiative that as a whole aims to really expand pretty significantly Penn's engagement with the African region, including with individual countries as well as the continent as a whole and particular sub-regions within the African continent. And just to sort of flag that the initiative as a whole has 3 parts, one of which is a scholarship for African students, particularly in the STEM fields. The other is a research fellowship centered on Penn libraries. And then the Holman Africa Research and Engagement Fund, which is administered by Penn Global. The other parts of the initiative are administered by different parts of the university, but all work together with this overall goal of expanding and strengthening Penn's engagement with Africa. So we're now going to talk a little bit about the kind of specifics, and for that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Chris.
Thanks very much, Scott. I will take the clicker, too. If I may. Thank you.
I wanted to maintain the power.
Right. A little bit easier to hear. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Klinecki. I am the funds coordinator at the Office of the Vice Provost for Global Initiatives. Scott is my direct supervisor. And as he mentioned, the two of us work primarily on our 4 research and engagement funds. That's why we're here to talk today. I also want to mention, while this is a long spiel that we're giving you here, I welcome questions in real time. Please feel free to raise your hand. I'm happy to pause and answer questions as they may come up. But as Scott hinted at, my work here at the podium right now is going to be to talk through some of the specifics about what the application process looks like and what I would recommend applicants keep in mind as they consider whether or not to apply to funds, and if so, how best to position themselves to achieve funding. We have 2 types of primary grant support, research and engagement projects and convening projects. I'll talk about the first one first. These are typically larger projects. They range in award amounts from about $20,000 to an outside of $150,000. And the average is usually between $40 and $50K, depending on what the ask is. The kinds of activities that we support through research and engagement projects include research and educational collaborations with international partners, as Scott hinted at earlier. Research travel, we can't fund first class or business class travel, but we can support up to 5 economy class trips, round trips per year. We support fieldwork, workshops, conferences, and other convenings. That item there feeds into the convening projects. I'll talk about that in a second. Curricular and course development initiatives, teaching and student engagement, service, learning, and social entrepreneurship, and certain kinds of training and capacity building. I want to pause there and kind of tease that out a little bit. If the training and capacity building in an application is open-ended, i.e. we want to train teachers to be better teachers, and that's the project, that is not viewed as favorably by our peer reviewers as we want to train these people in order to achieve this specific concrete objective or outcome of this project. So if you are going to train teachers and then test your pedagogy to see whether or not it's effective, that might be viewed more favorably. Convening projects tend to be smaller. Awards usually don't exceed about $10,000. These can range in scope from one large convening that takes place for the course of 1 or 2 days to smaller workshops or convenings. And that other model, that second model, we've seen more through and beyond the pandemic as we explore many ways to save costs in hybrid engagement and remote engagement. I also want to mention, you see here, convenings can be part of research and engagement projects, but you can also apply for a one-off. If you're not really sure what your R&E project would look like and you'd like to convene some folks to figure out what that might be, you are able to apply to convening projects. In fact, we have one person presenting later this afternoon who's doing exactly that. They're going to have some convenings for the course of this coming academic year, and then their plan is to develop an R&E proposal in the fall that will feed off of that convening. Eligibility requirements. There are 3 things that we tend to look for in folks who are able to be PIs or principal investigators of these projects that we award. First, they must be led by somebody with a long-term affiliation with Penn, typically faculty, staff, senior administrators, et cetera, and so forth. New this year, convening proposals may also be led by Penn graduate students, PhD students, and postdoctoral researchers. This is new. There are a couple of specific requirements if you are a student and you're applying. I don't have any in the audience right now, I don't think, but if you have anybody that you know who is interested in applying for this, please direct them to me and Scott. Happy to talk about that a little bit more in depth. The projects must be primarily focused outside of the United States or on a global issue. If you have a bunch of colleagues in the US talking about something that's happening in Philadelphia, there are other opportunities to fund those projects at Penn. That's not what our projects are designed to fund. However, you can include other US participants in your project as long as you are primarily engaging communities outside of the United States or focusing on a global or international issue. Finally, our projects generally require some source of matching funds. There's a bit of a variation between the research and engagement and convening projects in terms of what we look for in matching funds. For the IRENE projects, it's typically a 50% or one-to-one match with external funding. I'll loop back around that in just a moment. And then the convening projects, we accept a wide sort of variety of matching funds. Question, please. You beat me to the punch. That's a great question. So typical sources include Penn research stipends. I know that a lot of research professors have a small sum there. They often contribute. I know that the Dean's Global Inquiries Fund through SAS is another internal source that many people use to support their projects. External grants include, we've seen NIH has supported sort of external funding. Luce and Ford recently have also been engaged. So really anything that is able to work on the project that you're proposing. We're happy to have you draw from internal or external and so forth. Great question, thank you. Also wanted to mention these two little asterisks down here. As Scott mentioned before, we have these 4 funds, and while our applicants don't need to know sort of all the details at time of application, if your project is matched regionally or country-wise to a specific fund, there are some requirements that come with those funds. The China Research and Engagement Fund, or CREF, our applicants or our projects are required to make substantial use of the PWCC in Beijing. That's a brick and mortar place in Beijing for those of you who haven't seen it before. Catherine, you may have engaged them in your project. Yes. And they offer on-the-ground support. They can host convenings there. They can help you with, we've had some folks use them to find simultaneous translation between Mandarin Chinese and English for broadcasts to engage both populations. The India-facing projects from the India Research and Engagement Fund, or IREF, they're invited to collaborate with UPIASI, or the University of Pennsylvania Institute for the Advanced Study of India, based in New Delhi. They aren't required to engage as they are for CREF, but you are invited to do so. And it comes with a similar set of services that they can offer. If you would like your project to be considered for priority consideration, i.e. if you want to have the best chance at success, these are some things I would recommend you pay attention to. First, we look for projects that are promoting interdisciplinary and interschool or center collaboration. If your project is you in your office for 2 years on LexisNexis by yourself, that's not as appealing as engaging somebody else from another department who's also on LexisNexis. We also look for opportunities for junior faculty to engage. That's a priority for us. We look for proposals that have a strong chance or a demonstrated potential to build strong and equitable partnerships between Penn and institutions, organizations, or communities abroad. And finally, leverage your matching funds, which I just spoke to about just a moment ago. Your projects don't need to touch on all of these in your application process, but the more of these boxes you check, our peer reviewers are looking for these things, and the better chance you have at sort of being in that top application pool, the more of these you're able to incorporate. Speaking of priority consideration, we've had 2 pilot interdisciplinary thematic calls for proposals recently. In the spring of 2021, our special call outside of our annual call was for proposals that examine dimensions of racism and racial justice in a global context. We had a small group of applicants that came in with projects specifically designed to engage this. This past fall, in our annual call, in addition to welcoming all proposals across all disciplines and schools, we also especially welcomed proposals for projects that examine or relate to climate change and or climate justice in a global context. Now, the reason I mention this as part of the priority consideration, it's worth mentioning that of the 21 projects that we'll be celebrating the launch of this afternoon, 8 of them, 8 out of 21, are engaging this special call. So that was an extra box they were able to check sort of in the review process for a chance at getting funded. Briefly, if you're applying for research and engagement projects, we have an annual call. This is approximately what the schedule looks like. In August, we open applications for 8 weeks. The call for proposals is, as Scott mentioned, a common app. It's a pared down version. We ask for a 500 to 750 word narrative, sort of here's your project pitch, a small bit about research methodology, an overview of your budget. The idea is to have it be a less heavy lift than other application processes where you have to fill out a lot of paperwork. But we take these sort of expressions of interest applications and we send them through the application process after the October application deadline. We have peer reviewers that we engage. We finally take the applications that are recommended by peer reviewers up the chain to the Vice Provost for Global Initiatives, Ezekiel Emanuel, who gives the final sort of thumbs up. Which brings us to December. The finalists who have been given the green light by our peer reviewers and by Zeke are contacted for additional project information. This is the time where we ask for a more detailed budget proposal, et cetera, and so forth. By April, that's this month, we announce awards. That's what we're doing today. And then in the early summer, projects launch. This is, again, an annual thing. So August of 2022 is your first chance to apply. If you miss that first 8 weeks, you can try again in 2023. I also want to mention too, as I kind of hinted at before, Scott and I are not the buck doesn't stop with us when it comes to deciding which projects get funding. That's the peer reviewers and Zeke's job to figure out. So our job really is to help every applicant have the best chance they can have at success. We've worked with many applications over the course of their sort of development of their call, many of whom were awarded funding and will be presenting later this afternoon. So if you have other questions beyond today, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and Scott. We're happy to set up a Zoom meeting with you, exchange via email. We can't write your application for you, but we can sort of give you pointers on what we've seen works in the past and what tends to not work as well. If you are interested in a convening project, again, that's the smaller capped at around 10,000 award. New this year, we are doing rolling applications. You don't have to apply in August. We do ask you to apply at least 6 months prior to convening where you submit an application. We have an internal review process. We engage a couple of peer reviewers that are subject experts, depending on the project that you have that you're engaging. We'll notify you of the decision a few months after you've applied, and then transfer funds to the awarded projects a few months before the project happens. Exceptions to this general timeline may be made on a case-by-case basis. We recognize that there are sometimes opportunities crop up out of nowhere and they're going to be gone in a couple of months, and you may not have the 6 full months. But we do strongly encourage you to submit an application at least 6 months in advance to your convening if you can. I also want to mention for any students who may be listening on Zoom, if you are going to apply for convening funds as a principal investigator, your project or your convening needs to conclude at least 6 months before your planned departure from Penn. We're going to make sure we have time to attend to all the paperwork and closing the project. That brings us to a special guest we have today. Dr. Gavar-Kucher may be able to join us later, but for now we have Dr. Hellerstein, who is a recipient of our China Research and Engagement Fund. So Catherine, I'll invite you to come up on stage. And she's prepared a small PowerPoint slide deck of her own. Would you like the podium or? Yeah, no problem. You can put it that way. I'll push that button to advance.
God, the awkwardness of today, reality. Let's see. Okay, so I'm Catherine Hellerstein. I'm a professor in the Department of Germanic Languages and Literatures. Yeah, I can. And I'm the director of the Jewish Studies program at Penn. It's basically ending now, it is ending now, a 3-year Penn CREF, China Research and Engagement Fund project, China and Ashkenazic European Jewry, Transnational Encounters, which aimed to deepen discussions of how Jewish and Chinese cultures have been enriched by points of contact between peoples and nations, which arise with the translation of literature, philosophy, and other humanistic texts and media. The project consisted of 2 workshops in 2017 and 2019, and a conference in 2018. And I also created a Penn freshman seminar, and it's resulting now in 2 publications. One was just published in English, and the other will come out hopefully in Chinese. This project was the first to focus on the transnational cultural exchange, specifically between Ashkenazic Jewry, that is Jewry of Eastern Europe and Germany and France and China. And it aims to provide a unique opportunity to investigate, it did provide, to investigate translations from the languages and cultures of Jewry, of Ashkenazic Jewry, Yiddish and Hebrew, German, and English and other languages into Chinese, and from Chinese into those Jewish languages and cultures. We looked at cultural ramifications of texts and translations, and we also tried to highlight the roles played by actual personal contact between Jews from Central and Eastern Europe and people in and from China during the turbulent decades of the mid-20th century and on to today. The workshop that we ran in 2017 was aimed to, I guess we would have called it a preparatory or convening project, but we met in Nanjing University to plan our conference and publications. And there were 3 principal conveners or investigators, me and Song Lihong and Xu Xin, who are both professors of Jewish studies at Nanjing University. We had 11 participants coming from different places in China and different universities in China, as well as Harvard and Columbia and Hebrew University and Penn. There was, we don't have to go into details. I also took a trip to Shanghai and talked about my work there as well. In 2018, Li Hong, Song, and I organized and made happen this conference at Nanjing University. It was an international conference, as you can see the name, and it had a lot of different co-sponsors through Nanjing University and Penn, not only the China Research and Engagement Fund through Penn Global, but also the Jewish Studies program at Penn. And we brought 28 scholars. 18 of them were from China and 10 came from abroad. And their papers covered a huge range of disciplines, literature and translation, also history, sociology, religious studies, digital humanities, and art history, and politics, actually, too. In 2019, we did a workshop on teaching and translating Jews and China, and this was our 3rd event. It was a pedagogical workshop, and we held it at the beautiful Penn Wharton China Center in Beijing in June of 2019. We focused on teaching and translation in the field of Jews and China for both American and Chinese academics and very different kinds of universities and institutions. We had 18 participants who included senior professors and directors of Jewish studies programs, and believe it or not, there are a number of Jewish studies programs in China, which is, I think, wonderful and extremely interesting. They're very diverse, and they're all over the country. It also, besides the senior professors and directors, the participants included mid and early career professors, as well as lecturers, recent PhDs, and 2 doctoral candidates, as well as a Penn undergrad from my freshman seminar. The universities included Penn and Columbia, Nanjing University, Macau University, Yantai, Henan, universities, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Peking University, Beijing Foreign Studies University, Shanghai International Studies University, the Szechuan Foreign Studies University, Sun Yat-sen University, and several others, as well as a representative from the Freie Universität zu Berlin. And we had 3 panels, which were on teaching Jews in China, teaching Jewish literature and language within the context of China, and Sino-Jewish cross-cultural perspectives, just to prove the details. We gained an overview of Jewish studies programs in Chinese universities and institutes with their varying priorities and emphases, and also the kinds of scholarship that the directors and professors themselves were doing and teaching on both undergraduate and graduate levels. And it was really wonderful to find points of real connection between my work, for example, and their work, and other Americans' work, and then incredible differences as well. I'm almost done. As a result, or as one of the outcomes of this pedagogical workshop, I taught my freshman seminar course, Jews in China, for the 3rd time, and the last time I taught it was this past fall. And Li Hong and I have discussed developing a more extensive curriculum for both American and Chinese academic contexts. In addition, pre-pandemic, Li Hong took workshops in the US on teaching Israel topics and teaching the Holocaust, and he's developed new courses in Nanjing. He also has received a major grant to publish a series of books in Chinese on Jews and China, and Chinese translations of major texts and scholarship in Jewish studies and Jewish history, and he's published a number of volumes already, and more are in process. That's my first class. They were wonderful. But all of my students here have been wonderful. I have 2 publications of my own have come out of this project. One was a book I edited and introduced, IRENE EBER's Jews in China, Cultural Conversations, Changing Perspectives. It came out from Penn State University Press in 2020. This was 14 previously uncollected articles by the major Chinese, Israeli sinologist IRENE EBER. She passed away 3 years ago now. But I was able to bring this last work of hers into the world. And her essays ranged from studies of Chinese translations of the Hebrew Bible in the 19th century through Chinese translations of modern Yiddish literature and Jewish translations of Chinese literature as well. And then I've just published, it came out, well, I don't have my copy yet, but I've seen the digital version, a book of articles which Li Hong Song and I co-edited. It was published by De Gruyter in Germany, China and Ashkenazic Jewry, Transcultural Encounters. And we have many contributors to that book. I think we had 19 essays ranging on a whole different number of topics, and contributors from China, Israel, Germany, the States, Canada, anyway. And then finally, penultimately, another result of this project has been that IRENE EBER gave her archive, her scholarly archive, to the University of Pennsylvania libraries. And I think I was the midwife for that gift. So she has given the IRENE EBER gift of the YEDIDYA GEMINDER Memorial Archive of SINO-JUDAICA. And this is really quite a wonderful, very interesting collection. I don't know why that photo of her is so distorted there. But I should say that I just want to mention that today is Yom HaShoah, the Day of Remembrance of the Holocaust. And it's worth mentioning that YEDIDYA GEMINDER was the name of IRENE EBER's father, who was murdered by a neighbor in Ukraine during the Holocaust. He had no grave, they never found his body, and she left this archive as a way of commemorating and giving her father a kind of gravestone, except it's a living gravestone. In fact, there was a really wonderful article about my Jews in China freshman seminar and how we were using the archive at the end of the semester last fall. Finally, I'm hoping to do a capstone seminar on Zoom, a symposium. It would be very small, Li Hong Mi, Xu Xin, and maybe 2 or 3 other of our contributors to our volume, just to celebrate the book that came out. And this was from when we were starting to dream up the project. We had lunch with IRENE in Israel. So that's what I have to say. Thanks. I'm happy to answer questions. I don't know, do you want me to step down or stay up here?
If you don't mind, Catherine, maybe we'll have you sit on stage, and then we'll join you, and we'll sort of do Q&A. And thank you so much, Catherine. I think it's pretty clear why we love highlighting Catherine's project. But one thing that I'll just sort of point out that we really love to see is the kind of way in which an initial sort of investment, so to speak, in terms of our funds, but also just an initial step on the part of PIs can really sort of blossom and take a lot of different directions. And I think that's something in particular with Catherine's project that we saw. So we'll now be very happy to take any and all questions that you might have. And I'll also just point out that afterward we can continue informally as well over some refreshments. But welcome any questions you might have at this point.
I did want to just flag briefly, I saw that in the chat in Zoom in the back there, one of the virtual participants had asked if the presentation here would be available as a recording later. The answer is an emphatic yes. We will have that posted to the event website at a later date. So please check back there. And for those who have registered via Eventbrite, we will endeavor to contact you via your registration to alert you once this is posted.
Versus publications fees being published with the today when you publish in the National Journal, is that be funded?
Sorry. For the benefit of folks on Zoom, I'll just repeat the question, which is whether like publication expenses, open access fees, things like that could be funded as part of the awards. And the short answer is yes. We see that as as a perfectly valid sort of expense as part of awards. I may also add. Chris briefly touched on sort of different types of categories of things that are and aren't kind of fundable. The one that we run up against most often that we can't support are essentially aspects of kind of full-time sort of salary and benefits. That's the thing we most often encounter that we unfortunately have to say no to. So we can't buy out faculty time, for example. And in most cases, we aren't able to support sort of salary for what would be sort of a full-time position. What we can support are things like postdoc stipends, certainly RA expenses, things like that. But we aren't able to kind of support what would otherwise be a full-time kind of position. And it's maybe worth kind of saying that there are several reasons for that, but the kind of most fundamental one is just that we're structured as essentially a kind of seed fund. We hope to leverage, an initial investment to catalyze kind of longer-term global engagement activities. And because of that sort of seed funding, sort of catalytic objective, we really aren't set up or structured to support things long-term. So when it gets to something like supporting a full-time position, that's something that isn't really doesn't really sort of match with our objectives and sort of how we're set up. And certainly we would not want to be kind of in a position of being responsible for someone's position and then only be able to to support that for a limited period of time.
I think I may actually chime in real quick on that too, on the allowable and unallowable costs. So Scott mentioned the biggest one that we tend to run up against, which again is not being able to support sort of the equivalent of a faculty or full-time salary. But there are a few other costs that we aren't allowed to fund through our funds. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that we allow up to 5 round-trip economy class tickets internationally per year. That limit doesn't extend to your matching funds. If you have matching funds that are able to support something that we can't, you're more than welcome to. Most recently, we've had a couple of convening projects that want to bring in more than 5 collaborators to Penn for their convening. And we've been able to support the first 5 tickets, economy class, and then their matching funds have paid for the extra tickets. If you have somebody who'd like to fly in first class and you have external funds to do that, you're more than welcome to. We just can't use our funds to support first class tickets.
And I might, if I could abuse the the chair, literally, I guess I'd actually love to just get Catherine and invite you, Catherine, to what sort of advice would you give to people who are thinking about applying for the funds, either just as sort of a matter of tactics or just sort of in terms of thinking about what the value of putting in the time to apply might be?
Do it. It's wonderful.
We didn't arrange that before.
No, this was not a planted question. No, I actually should have started by saying thank you to Scott and to Chris and to Amy and to Zeke for this incredible opportunity, which really took me out of my my other scholarly and teaching interests, which is modern Jewish American and Yiddish literature and film and gender studies. I mean, this was a whole new area for me, and the opportunity of being supported by Penn and by Penn Cref and Penn Global just opened the world literally for me. I mean, this was already pre-pandemic. We can't travel to China right now, but thank God we at least have Zoom and WeChat and email and whatever. I also would say that Li Hong Song and I worked out a really good collaboration of financial support for our events, and so so most of the supporting funds came from his resources at Nanjing University and the Berman Center for Jewish and Israel Studies at Nanjing University, which was founded by Shushint, another of our principal investigators. And they hosted and paid for most of our symposium, our conference and our workshop at Nanjing. But when it came to working at the Penn China Center, the Wharton Penn China Center in Beijing, Li Hong couldn't contribute explicit money. I mean, the terms are very complicated internationally, or at least in China. But he did contribute some of the preparation funds for that, and then I got other funding from the Jewish Studies program and used some of my own research funds to, and I think those were my sources. But it can be, I guess it could be complicated. You should expect complications about the limitations of what different countries and universities and institutions and other cultures and nations will do, outside of their own campus, for example. So just talk explicitly with your partners about these terms, as soon as you can, and you can figure it out. There's lots of ways to figure it out. And it really, I've made lifelong friends among those many faces I showed on the slides. And actually, one anecdote, when the pandemic started in March of 2020, and there was a shortage of protective gear, including masks in the United States, I had about 8 of my colleagues and former grad students and friends from China send me boxes and boxes of masks. And I have many siblings who are and cousins and nieces who are in the medical professions, and they were like using garbage bags as protective gear, you know, and fishermen's stuff and carpentry masks, and I just sent them tons of these masks that my friends in China had sent. So again, there's unexpected connections and results of those connections beyond the academic, which is incredibly moving and sort of beautiful, I thought.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you speak a little bit louder?
Of course.
Thank you.
My question is, when we're thinking about the research component, and there is a postdoc that will be partially funded using this funding, how the proposal is structured? Is that of course, as a faculty, I work closely with the postdoc. Is the postdoc in charge of the submission, or I am in charge of the submission?
That is an excellent question. I'm going to repeat the question for the Zoom audience. The question is for those applicants who are interested in working with a postdoc, would the postdoc be in charge of submitting the application? What does the working relationship look like between a postdoc that would be supported through the funds if it's awarded funding, and for the researcher, the investigator, the faculty pursuing the project? Thank you very much for the question. A couple of sort of pieces of that answer include we welcome postdocs to participate actively in the process. Our expectation is that the lead principal investigator will be responsible for at least half of the project. That is to say, if a faculty member has attached their name to a project, but it's really a postdoc's project, we don't look for those in funding unless it's a convening fund, in which case the postdoc can be a PI. That's okay. For research and engagement projects, again, we expect the faculty member to participate and be responsible for at least half. When it comes to submitting, we are absolutely happy to have postdocs or other assistants do sort of the paperwork via SurveyMonkey Apply, which is the online portal that we use to receive applications on the behalf of the principal investigator. There's a function, this is getting a little in the weeds, but there's a function in SurveyMonkey Apply that allows the applicant whose name is attached to an application to add their faculty supervisor, the project lead, as a collaborator, so that the faculty member can log in, look at the documentation, edit it in real time, and not have to kind of go through them in order to upload things. Does that answer your question? Excellent. Thank you so much. Please.
Great question about where a project focused on Southeast Asia, for example, might fit in terms of our 4 funds. Yeah, I think you could certainly also ask the question about other regions, Latin America, the Middle East, et cetera, Central Asia. And there are a couple of things to just sort of note about that. One is that apart from the global engagement, let me say the short answer is those would all fit within the global engagement fund for the most part. However, one of the things that we have moved a little bit towards, and this is again getting a little bit in the weeds of sort of our back end sort of processes in terms of how we structure funding. But the important part from the sort of applicant perspective is that we're now, because of some changes we've instituted, better able to support projects that have that are multi-regional or that sort of focus on countries, on multiple countries, continents, regions, et cetera. So we do certainly encourage and support those types of projects. And it also, definitely needs to be said, we welcome proposals that touch on any region of the world. And very much welcome projects that fit all of those. The fact that there is a separate sort of China, India, and Africa fund just reflect those being focus countries and regions as part of sort of university objectives. But I, again, emphasize we welcome and support applications that touch on all parts of the world. I think with that, we can move into a break, and certainly can continue conversations informally with other questions, and certainly, especially for folks joining via Zoom, please do reach out to Chris and I. As Chris said, and I really very much agree that our job is to give every application the best chance of success, and that's really our job, is to work with you and all potential applicants. Hannah, did we? Great.
Yes, I will take that question. That's actually a really great example. 1 to 3 years is the average sort of project length. The convening projects may be shorter than that. In fact, one of the convening projects we're celebrating the launch of today is going to be over by the end of July. They are going to really hit the ground running. But 1 to 3 years is the average. We've seen a couple of projects go to beyond 3 years, especially, and this is, again, getting a bit in the weeds, but we have, as part of sort of the functioning of the funds themselves, we have a mechanism for no-cost extensions. If you encounter unforeseen delays, as many of us did during the pandemic, where you weren't able to accomplish what you would imagine you would be able to accomplish, we're allowed to sort of allow you to extend the duration of your funding without increasing the amount of funding. So we've had some projects that plan to go 1 to 2 years that are now in their 4th year, but are going to be wrapping up soon. Yeah, and so yeah, thank you so much for everybody for joining. Once again, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and Scott. Our emails are up here on the screen. We are happy to set up a time to chat with you over Zoom or perhaps in some sort of safe location, pandemic conditions pending. If you're on campus, we are happy to engage further. Thank you so much.
And if you want to know the real story, we'll connect you with Catherine. But thank you so much to everybody once again. And I also just want to also thank Catherine for joining us today and providing an awardee perspective. So thanks to everybody.